We're joined by three experts to talk about social media and sustainability. We have Johnny Cates, who is Digital Manager from Clearly So, Solitaire Townsend, who is the founder of Futerra, Kat Jones, who is Product Director at Unruly.
Thank you very much. My name is Solitaire Townsend and I'm the co-founder of Futerra. Only recently, as we begin to see some weak signals of a possible massive change in our global societies, have I started to become actually excited about the potential for social media to replace capitalism. Social media, tiny signals that social media could be better than capitalism is at fulfilling some basic human drivers, and fulfilling those basic human drivers in a way that essentially does away with a lot of the stuff that we make, consume, dispose, and which are causing so many of our problems. Now, they can't do away with all of the stuff. There's food, there's the necessities of life, there's energy that we're still going to need. The Royal Society calculated we do have enough basic resources, enough timber and land in order to feed and clothe and educate and support 9 billion human beings well. We just don't have enough of that stuff for everybody to be conspicuously consuming. So we can all live, and we can all live well on what this planet can produce. But if everybody in the world wanted to live with the amount of conspicuous consumption as those of us on this call do, then we'd need 3 planets. So where does social media come in? First of all, you have to think about conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption is all about sex. Conspicuous consumption is all about saying, look at me, look how much I'm able to consume, look how much society lets me consume. I must be a good mate. You know, Darwin worked this out when he realised the honest signalling of a peacock was a way that a male peacock with its big, beautiful fan of feathers, which, by the way, makes the peacock easy to catch and easy to eat, that these big peacock's feathers can only be grown by the most desirable peacocks. The strongest, healthiest, fastest, smartest peacocks can afford to waste. Wastefulness makes you a good mate in the natural world. But, of course, also in the natural world, the system itself makes all of that waste somebody else's food. We stepped out of that a long time ago as human beings, and when we consume our big cars and our boob jobs and our food and our huge houses and our overseas holidays, actually the natural world can't deal with that waste. And when you get right down to it, most of that is being consumed because of sex. Not necessarily sex as in getting laid, but sex as in status signalling. So we need a replacement for status signalling. Lots of much more complicated maths and science about that. But when you get right down to it, we need a way for human beings to indicate to each other what their social status is in a way that doesn't require stuff. That's the absolute core of the sustainability challenge. And social media could, it isn't yet, but it could be a better way for human beings all over the world to indicate to each other their social status, their place in the hierarchy, without having to buy a lot of stuff. And that's what my TEDx talk was about. The psychology works, the sociology works. I'm not sure whether the economics works of it. That's for somebody else to work out. But we are beginning to see some indications that young people, especially prepubescents, the 11 to 15-year-olds, care more about how many likes they get for their selfie than they do about getting a driving license. And that, for me, is an indicator that some of our status anxiety could move online and could move out of materials. Doesn't make us any happier, but it does save the planet.
I'm Kat. I am Product Director for ShareRank at Unruly. So Unruly is a social video distribution company, and ShareRank is the part of our 360 product set which allows us to test videos for their social potential. So we have done research specifically looking at video, but looking at the social aspects of video. So trying to understand how people engage with different types of video, how different types of people engage with different types of video as well, and what does that prompt them to do? What kind of reactions do they feel, and what does that lead to in terms of sharing behaviours, but also what are the interplays between sharing behaviours and other actions, and how likely they might be to find out more about what they're watching, and so on. So essentially we have an algorithm, the ShareRank algorithm, which predicts shareability, and we've built that algorithm by training we have a big data set. We just hit our 90,000 data points milestone, which is quite exciting. But basically what we did was to send out lots of videos to lots of people and ask them questions about the videos, and what they thought and how they'd react, and what they intended to do next as well. And what we were able to do then was to take all of those different indicators and train that to a set of actual data that we have around views and shares of video online, and this is a set that we hold in the viral video chart, which is owned by Unruly. And that set of data allowed us to say actually what proportion of people did share each of these videos. So once we look at combining the two, we use multiple regression, and we basically said out of all these candidate things that could affect how people share, which ones actually do. So that gave us a feel for the things that prompted kind of social behaviours. And when I'm talking about social behaviours here, I'm talking about sharing behaviours. So I'm talking about what makes somebody share. And Claire, you just mentioned the different reasons that people might share, and there are lots of reasons, and this is one of the things that that we measure. So when we're looking at ShareRank, one of the things that's important in the algorithm is intent. So how much do people think they want to share, but also how much do they want to talk about it to somebody in real life? How much do they want to watch the video again? So there's some kind of conscious understanding of my intent, but then there are also the most significant thing is actually emotional response. So we're talking about kind of a whole set of psychological responses, but the strongest one is emotion, so particularly positive emotion. So you make somebody feel positive emotion, and there's over and above this intent that they know and that they can report, there's a direct stronger correlation than with intent with positive emotion. So we start to see this coming through really strongly. Quite interesting when we talk about sort of sustainability and some of the challenges that we're facing as a society, because it's not very common for videos to evoke negative responses, but this is one area in which negative responses are used quite a lot to strong effect. So there's the whole psychological response piece, and then there's the social motivation, and this is the bit that people kind of forget. So it's about, yes, make people give people an emotional experience, but also give them a reason to share. And that reason can be anything we see. So in our data set we have a lot, and this is kind of one of the things that I'm looking at with my thesis, is actually how does the motivation to share for a social cause or for some kind of social good, so we call this motivation the social good motivation. So I would share because it shows my support for the cause, because I want to get behind this this message and start promoting. So how do people sharing for that reason? And then this is kind of tying in, Solitaire, to what you're talking about, which is where people are sharing for status. So we have two different kudos metrics that we test for. So one is kudos trend spotter. So this is, I'm sharing because it makes me first, and I know before anybody else that this is happening, and it makes me look good. And then we have kudos authority, which is this is not necessarily new, but I'm an authority and I'm sharing this, and it makes me look like I know what I'm talking about. So both of those, I think, are tying. We're seeing a lot of people, very specific types of content, but that becomes a really big reason for people to share and start engaging.
Could you talk us through a little bit about this activism and activism, and what the kind of criticism is of social media and good causes, and what your kind of counter would be to that?
There's this idea that has been kind of put forward, and that's a relatively mainstream idea in the sort of social good kind of not-for-profit sector, which looks at slacktivism as it's kind of a term which actually is defined as essentially it's defined as just taking an action that's easy, but in popular usage recently it's become actually something that has much more of a negative connotation. So the idea of slacktivism was kind of initially proposed by a guy called Morozov, and he was suggesting that slacktivist behaviour kind of harms the behaviour of, well, it basically inhibits people, stops people from taking more meaningful actions. So if people can take a token action, if they can share a video or they can like something, then they're less likely to do something more material. So it's quite interesting to see how this sort of ties into this idea of social status, because status, I think, is very much online and in games and all these other places. Status is very much tied to quite quick, easy actions in a lot of cases, that it doesn't take much for you to share a video that then makes you look like you're a real authority in the area. So I have looked at some numbers specifically around video, and I've been looking at the intent metrics that we hold data on. So looking at the intent to which people want to share a video, particularly to support a cause. So if people are motivated to share because they support a cause, Morozov would argue that they then share the video to support the cause and then they don't do anything else with that cause. And actually what the data has shown so far is that we actually see a really nice correlation between the intent to share to support a cause and the intent to find out more about that cause and to kind of engage more deeply with the cause. So it's quite a nice finding for us in terms of finding that actually they're kind of working together. So the more likely people are to engage with the video in general, the more likely they are to share it, the more likely they are to find out more. So it's, yeah, it seems to be working quite nicely, and we wouldn't say that slacktivism, you know, one of the dangers was if people are creating highly shareable content, then they really shouldn't be, because it's going to stop people doing all the donations or the going to the marches or whatever it is, but actually they look like they're working in support of each other.
So now we've talked quite a lot about the positives, and I know we've kind of had slacktivism as a challenge, but I wonder, are there some things that we kind of have to be aware of about responsibility and social media? So Kat, I guess this might be interesting from your perspective of, is there an interplay between the developed world and the developing world, and the way we have a responsibility in the way we're creating representation, and both ways?
Interesting. So I think one of the first things to say on that is that it's really gorgeous that we have these tools that allow the world to be so much more connected, because I think that a lot of our heritage and some of the issues that we're facing come from the idea of difference and how different we are from them, and social media in general really help us to break down some of the barriers. I mean, obviously that the people are different and there will always be differences, but you know, there are ways in which actually people can hear about stories from places that they don't know, and they haven't got experience of those stories or those people in those areas, but they can identify with them and they can see something of themselves and the people that they do know in those stories, and it suddenly makes these global issues much more personal. And when you talk about emotion being one of the key drivers of engagement and of sharing, it's actually really important to start making those things more personal, because that's how you get people to engage. So it's quite interesting. I think it's interesting to see the differences just broadly in the way that people share. So we tend to see that there's a lot more sharing in developing markets, just in general, probably to do partly with the fact that the media is newer there. The types of people that I was talking a little bit about sharing broadcast and narrowcast sharing, so when it's just, you know, to private audiences or small audiences to wider. So what we tend to see is that the developed markets, where we're looking at kind of sharing in Western Europe and in the US, the shares there tend to be a lot more targeted. So compared to, you know, Brazil or Southeast Asia, for example. So there's kind of a different engagement with sharing and the way that people engage with content. And then there's a whole kind of host of stuff around the fact that the bite-sized nature of content like this. So the fact that actually you have to create something that people can snack on, and that they do in order to make it social and in order to make it easy for people to consume and to add their voice to and to send around, it has to be quite simple, and it has to be distilled, and it has to be focused. And actually that raises a lot of questions about how do you distill a complex message, because a lot of these messages we're talking about are really complex. So how do you distill that down? And it then becomes as much about what you do say as it is about what you don't say. And there's a certain tendency, I think, for people to forget about what they don't say, and the messages and the stories that they don't tell, and what their implication in not saying things means.
Have you got an example, or maybe is there a kind of a cause or a video you can think of that either does that badly or does that well, kind of distilling the information quickly? And
There's an interesting video that I watched this morning, which is in the viral video chart actually, which has just jumped into my head, which is Shakira won a Hero Award for something, some American award of some sort, I'm not sure. But it was an interesting video because it's one of those videos you watch and it says, you know, Shakira's done all this amazing work for Colombian communities and kind of education of poor children in Colombia, and it's sort of presented very much as the, you know, I think the voiceover was sort of an American voiceover saying, you know, some children are so poor that they don't even have education, and there's this whole kind of burgeoning up of the us and them that comes through, and the you know, a lot of questions that get raised around how healthy is it to have this Western interventionist approach to development and this alienization of certain communities. But then you watch the video and there are some really positive things in terms of awareness and so on. So it's very interesting, and I think it's a balance, and it's always going to be a balance, particularly when you're trying to deliver complex messages in short spaces of time.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one challenge. I think, Johnny, you had something you wanted to discuss around that actually internet access and devices and those impact on the environment actually themselves.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of almost like a subplot to the sort of things we've been discussing. But I'm just wondering if anyone in the room thinks or is concerned about the environmental impact of mass communication online, basically. I think in 2010, Facebook said that their servers had a carbon footprint of about 285,000 metric tons of CO2. And it just feels like replacing this offline status with online status is an assumption, perhaps, that that is environmentally neutral. And, you know, the environmental impact of sending a tweet or doing a Google search, it's just something that kind of plays on my mind sometimes.
If online activity, if online status, if what we do online is just an addition on top of everything else which we already consume, it just becomes another net negative. You know, it just becomes another huge consumer of energy and resources, and we know the problems with electronic waste, etc. If online status can replace some of our conspicuous consumption, then Facebook's data centers are welcome to all of the carbon that they want, because the comparability between the amount of time, the amount of attention that can be done virtually versus your car, versus your food, versus your home is so minuscule. The other thing, of course, is it is much, much, much easier to plug a solar panel into a laptop than it is to plug a solar panel into a factory. Or to plug a solar panel into a car, or to plug a solar panel into all of the rest of our infrastructure. Social media matches renewable energy very well. It doesn't just match it technically, it also matches it aesthetically. This thing has the same aesthetic lines as a wind turbine. It sure doesn't have the same aesthetic lines as a coal power station. So there's even an intuitive and aesthetic of beauty alignment between renewables and digital technology. And of course that's crucial for, exactly as Kat was saying, the developing world, because more people have mobile phones than toilets. So mobile phones have got further than sanitation, mobile phones have got a lot further than democracy, and mobile phones have got a lot further than capitalism. So this is coming. The absolute trick, the beautiful serendipity would be if all of those 11-year-olds in the developing world, of which there's a hell of a lot more 11-year-olds in the developing world than there is in the developed, because they're young countries as opposed to old countries, if their status definition is laid down by what they do on this rather than what they own, then we're good. The problem for Europe and North America is we've got a lot of old people, and our definition of status got laid down when we were 11, and so we can't make this transition.
I've got a question, Solitaire, for you about this. So I'm quite interested and excited because I haven't heard anything like this before, so it's cool. But I was wondering how you see this kind of status, because obviously there's a disconnect, and the disconnect varies by audience, but there's a disconnect between the people that we socialise with online and the people that we socialise with in real life.
Yeah.
So do you see status as being tied to an individual as kind of it's an individual need for validation, which can be satisfied either by those people online or by these people offline, or do you see it as actually something that you need from the people that you're exposed to wherever? And in that case, how do you reconcile the fact that some people will never see you online?
Kat, that is spot on. Because if you get right down to this is about sex. This is about our immediate intuitive responses to other people, and it needs to be ubiquitous. Your social status, in terms of your online status, your digital status, needs to be one of the first things that someone sees about you everywhere, not just in your online communities, but in your daily communities. And so this won't start intersecting with that endocrine system, as in, if I spot a hottie, they need to be hot because of the social media status I can see radiating off them, as much as by how they look and the subconscious clues that I pick up about what they own, what class they are, what clothing they're wearing. You know, this is, we've got these massive brains. How we indicate status to each other is very, very complicated and multi-layered. And the only way that's possible is through wearables. So again, this is through a dark glass, dark, tiny, tiny, weak signals. But if with my Google Glass, which is a very clunky technology, and with the much more sophisticated ones that come, if when I look at you, I see what you wear, and I automatically see your social media status, then my endocrine system can get involved. When I look at a room of people and I catch from the corner of my eye someone with very high social media status, my shoulders can go back, my face can flush, my body can become involved. And that's when it begins to work, because you're absolutely right. At the moment, there's too much of a delay. I look at you, I have to check down here. It's not very sexy. It doesn't actually interact with how we go about flirting. I've got to be able to flirt based on your social media status.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's actually a very good place to leave it, because we probably have to let you both get back to changing the world through social media. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be putting this up soon so other people can hear from you and get involved in the conversation. So thank you both.
Thank you
very much.